Hello everyone. This video is a quick tutorial on editing and saving cells in BlenderNeuron. I'm going to go over how to import cells to Blender, some basic Blender navigation in case you're unfamiliar, tools to edit your cell, and how to save those changes and export them back to Neuron. If you've never started BlenderNeuron before, I'd suggest checking out the installation tutorial, which you can find here on the website, but I will also link to that in the description of this video. So to get started, I'm going to be using this Hawk file called samplecell.hawk. You can find that in the BlenderNeuron GitHub. I will also link to that in the description. So I'm going to get started by downloading this to my downloads folder real quick, and then opening the terminal. So now I'm going to start Neuron so you can follow along. You can type what I'm typing here or Neuron GUI-Python in the terminal, whichever works on your device. And now I'm loading the Hawk file I just downloaded from my downloads folder. Make sure to point this line to wherever it is on your device. Don't forget to instantiate your cell. I'm just going to call it cell1. And now that I've loaded the cell, I can check that it's loaded correctly in the GUI by going to Graph and then Shape Plot. And if I see my cell there, then I'm ready to start BlenderNeuron. And I can do that by typing from BlenderNeuron import neuron start. And now I'm ready to start Blender itself. This tutorial is using BlenderNeuron with Blender 3.5. Keep in mind that the API might look different if you're not using the Blender 3 series. But in Blender 3, you'll find the BlenderNeuron tab by pressing this small arrow on the top right, and it should be on the sidebar that comes up. If you don't see it here, make sure that you have the right BlenderNeuron add-on installed for your Blender version. And if Neuron is connected, then under Node Status, it should say Connected and Listening. If you click to expand Cells in Group, you should see a list of all of the cells currently loaded in Neuron. To import the checked off cells to Blender, I can press Import Cell Groups to Blender under Import and Export here. So there's our sample cell from earlier. Now I'll just go over some basic Blender functions for navigation in case you're unfamiliar. You can rotate the view with the middle mouse button, or 2 fingers if you're on a trackpad. Pan the view with Shift and the middle mouse button. Then select the cell by left-clicking on it. And with the cell selected, I can press G to move it around the 3D view, and then click again to set it. I can press R to rotate the cell around the object origin, which is this orange dot in the Soma here, and then press S to scale it up or down. If you want to be a bit more precise, it can go back to the sidebar here and press Item, and you can put in exact location and dimension values. Keep in mind that 1 unit in Blender is 1 micron in Neuron, regardless of what it has here. So for example, our cell is 201 microns wide on the x-axis. And now to bring the cell back to the center, I'm just putting in zeros for the location here. Now to save any changes I make in Blender to Neuron, if I go back to the BlenderNeuron tab, I press Update Groups with View Changes, and then Export Cell Groups to Neuron. And that's going to export any changes to morphology or position back to Neuron. So just for demonstration, this is what the shape plot currently looks like in Neuron. But if I press S and then X to make the cell narrower on the x-axis, and then update groups with view changes, export cell groups to Neuron, you can see that now in Neuron, it also looks narrower. To edit individual segments on the cell instead of the whole cell, under Cell Group Options, I can switch from Interact with each cell to Section, and then re-import the cell. Now I can select individual segments, and if I press R, I can rotate that segment and all of the connected segments. I want to rotate on the XY plane, so I'm just going to press the Z-axis on this navigation tool. And I can save changes the same way I did before with update groups with view changes and then export cell groups to Neuron. And there's the updated shape plot. If you want to automate these edits, Blender has a Python API. The easiest way to access it in Blender 3 is by going to the Scripting tab on the top here. There's a Python console that you can run commands in, or you can run scripts on this side here. You can open one from your device or create a new one and then run it with this button. If you want to learn more about scripting in Blender, there's a lot of information on the Blender documentation site. So I've navigated back to the Layout tab, and one final thing of note in Blender is that most objects are made up of vertices and edges. And if I select one of these segments and press Tab, I can bring up Edit mode and see the vertices that make it up. And if I drag click and select some of these vertices and then press G, I can actually move them around and change what the segment looks like. If I select the vertices on the end of the segment here, and press E, I can actually extrude or extend the segment. I can also delete these vertices on the end. Just make sure not to delete the entire segment. And then to exit edit mode, I can press Tab again and bring my BlenderNEURON tab back. So that's all for this tutorial. In future tutorials, I will be going over other BlenderNEURON functions like animating activity, creating synapses, confining cells to layers, and those tutorials will be posted on blenderneuron.org/tutorials. You can also find a written version on docs.blenderneuron.org under Getting Started. Thank you for watching.